Welcome, my lords, to the Well-Earned Comforts podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Seth.
Thank you for joining us on the Walls of Isengard as we explore the many works of Tolkien and discuss life. We're glad to have you as part of the fellowship, as there's no telling where we'll be swept off to. And today, just kind of like the hobbits have been swept off by eagles before, we are getting to encounter some eagles in this discussion on the Battle of the Five Armies. But before we do that, it's been quite some time since we've had a one-on-one podcast with Seth and Sam here. So we're going to babble like Butterbur for just a little bit. So I'm going to check in with Seth over there in Michigan. What's going on, man? How you doing? How's the wife? How are the, I want to say babies, but babe and one to be?
Yeah, it has been a while. Things are going well. I'm on a little bit of a hiatus from school. I finished my semester and get about 3 weeks off before starting the next one. 9 consecutive semesters. We're about a third of the way through. So one step forward in that regard, but wife is doing well. She's feeling very pregnant at this point. I don't know that I've even really announced that much, but yeah, Amanda's pregnant. We still don't know if we're having a boy or a girl yet, but we will find out. She's about 16 weeks along, so it's still a little early. But Evelyn's doing great. She's got some speech issues that we're trying to cycle through, I guess, like motor planning and stuff for her. So she's in speech therapy. But aside from not being able to convey her thoughts verbally, she communicates with sign language. She's ridiculously intelligent. I mean, it's so much fun to just watch her change and grow every single day. So it's it's a magical thing to have children, and I don't know why people hate on it so much. And you showed me our good friend Bear right before, and he's even grown since we saw you guys just a couple months ago.
Yes, he has. You'll probably hear him in the background making a ruckus, but he's going like crazy. He took his first couple steps this past week, and then he stopped walking because he figured it's slower than crawling at this point, and he just wants to get everybody as fast as possible.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, and it's funny because you can hear him come because he smacks the ground so loud, like with his hands on our hardwood floor. But he's such a joy. It's been a lot of fun getting to hang out with him, and Ariel's been just baking out the wazoo with her new sourdough business she's been doing, a little sourdough baking that she's just created with this like one little starter, and the starter's name is Frodo. Frodo Breadens.
Frodo.
So
Frodo Breadens. That's actually really creative. I love that.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
But she's making like bagels and cinnamon rolls and loaves of bread and muffins. I mean, she's getting all over the place, and people, like, she just sells them to people in the neighborhood and around our town, and she's been making a pretty decent amount of money off of it, just a little side thing on top of getting to stay home with Bear and take care of things around here. So
I asked her on Facebook if she would ship, and she's like, no. I'm not kidding. I would pay so much money to have Mom's cinnamon rolls. Like, if it was possible for them to be mailed and still be fresh, I'd pay a hefty sum for a batch of Mom's cinnamon rolls.
The issue right now, because she uses Mom's like recipe outside of like the dough is sourdough, but
right.
Everything else is the same as what Mom does. And the issue right now is she's making these batches, but she's selling them for other people. At first, she like sold 1 or 2 at a time, and so I got to eat 2 or 3. But now she's selling whole packs at a time, and that's it. And so I don't get any. I just have to see her bake it and then smell it. And
yeah, you walk in and it's the aroma is through the room, and you're salivating.
It's like, you got to be kidding me.
That's tough scenes. But I'm glad it's going well for her. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. It's been something that she's been just kind of wanting to do something a little extra around the house, and she's really good at it, and she loves it. But yeah, it's been a busy summer outside of like seeing you guys. We went on a vacation with Ariel's family. I went on a mission trip with students and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to get back onto the podcast here. But that's probably enough babbling like Butterbur, unless there's I'm sorry, I don't know if I guess I kind of told the world that you were having another baby. I think you had already mentioned it on Twitter, so I thought it would be fine, but I don't
know if I did. I might have. I don't know. I'm not saving it for any big announcement or anything. But no, I'm not upset at all. That's not even a little. We're just excited. It's funny because anytime we're talking about the baby to Evelyn, we're like, yep, there's a little blooper in there because anytime you see the ultrasounds, the baby's just like blooping around, and that
Yeah,
sibling
yeah,
in there. And Evelyn, I don't think she gets it yet, but I'm sure she'll have a rude awakening considering she's obviously an only child until this one is born.
Sure.
And it's going to be an interesting adjustment for sure, but in the end, it'll be worth it
Yeah.
for sure.
She's got such a sweetheart, though. It'll take her probably, I don't know, maybe a month or so, but then once she gets used, like, she's just gonna love on that kid so much.
She will.
I think it's gonna be great. Yeah,
I think once
it'll be fun
she
to watch.
finds out that she can help and do things and like bring diapers or whatever it is, she'll be
Yeah,
very happy to be involved.
yeah, definitely. Well, all right. I guess we'll jump into some riddles in the dark, where we
Oh,
take our
jeez.
3-in-1 Lord of the Rings and see if we can stump the other person with some dialogue, and if they can guess whereabouts in the book we are reading from and who specifically is reading or talking. So, I will go first if that's okay.
Sure. I opened up to an easy one for you, but that's all right. It's
I
actually
love that.
it's actually rather fitting, but let's hear what you've got.
Okay. Who knows, said blank. All is night now. It is all dark, but is not all night, said blank.
Is that Barragund on the walls of Minas Tirith, or isn't?
Nope.
It's not.
Let me keep going.
No, hold on. It is all dark, but it is not all night. Oh, that's Frodo talking to Sam, isn't it? And like,
Nope. Out of practice, boy. Come on.
yeah,
Now.
no kidding. What the heck? What the heck? Okay, give me a little bit more then. I feel like I should know this.
You will. You will. When sun comes, we feel her, even when she is hidden. Already she climbs over east mountains. It is the opening of the day in the sky fields.
Oh, that's Han Bully Han, isn't it?
Yeah, good
Or
job.
Han Bully Han. Something like that, right?
However you want to say it. Yes. Talking
to Theoden, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's a good one. I feel like there's similar themes to that in other places in the book too. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of Tolkien's stuff has to do with like light and darkness. I mean, obviously Rings of Power took that to the extreme and made it sound terrible, but a lot of his like, I guess, imagery has to do with night and darkness. But I like how he said, you know, it's all dark, but it's not all night. Like that's the difference.
Yeah.
Because it's what Sauron is bringing darkness with him, as opposed to like it being actual night. Darkness.
Yeah, it's an artificial darkness. It's not of the world.
Yes, exactly.
All right, this one I feel will be pretty darn easy for you, but hopefully you enjoy it. Maybe said blank.
I don't get it.
It might be. Maybe said blank, but I do not yet know exactly where we are, unless I am quite astray. I guess that we are above and north of the Great Gates.
So that'd be Gandalf in the Mines of Moria?
That is correct.
Talking to Mary, potentially?
Or... honestly, who is he talking to? I think he's just kind of talking, because the sentence before that is Boromir asking which way we go, and then
gotcha.
Yeah, and then after that it's more just like explaining, like just more narration. Nicely done, though. Gotcha. You destroyed me on that one.
You did give me an easy one. I'm glad that it was that.
I opened up right to it, and I was like, hey, that is fitting, because we have a very similar topic here today.
Indeed, indeed. Before we get to that, we'll jump in real quick through Tidings of the Fellowship, and we had a letter sent in to us by Andrew, and this was a very long time ago. We're sorry, Andrew. We're just getting to it. I did respond in the email to him, but he sent this on June 18th, and this is what Andrew had to say. He said, I'm checking on you guys and seeing how you're doing. How are the families and jobs going? Any church activities going on this summer? My kids are loving the summer weather that has arrived. And that is why we have not been podcasting, because of all the awesome things this summer has been going on for both of us.
Very true. Very true.
Yes. He says he's been in a book series called The Bone Ships. He says it's a cool world, and I'm really enjoying it. I do finding stories outside the Lord of the Rings from time to time, but I have been longing to get back into a Tolkien book again. I've seen a few book reading clubs that cover the Silmarillion and the Fall of Numenor. I would like to pick up to these two and go through them with some help. It is nice to get a bit more from the other people reading along and hearing their thoughts, which I 100% agree. Like our
Yes.
read through of Children of Hurin was awesome doing that together, and you just get more from it. He says, I haven't found much time for Lord of the Rings media of late myself. I did like your episodes of the scenes and the grading them. Thank you. He said there were a lot of scenes that you guys covered. It's hard to grade some of them, and most of them are so high up in the cinematic history of the world. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. He said, if I find some time, I have been wanting to play Shadow of War again. A few lore issues, that's true, but it is a cool game to be in the heart of Mordor and fighting your way to victory and combating the evil surrounding you. Very true. I've only started Shadow of War. I finished Shadow of Mordor. I really liked that. It was like definitely like fan fiction when it comes to the lore side of things, but it's a really fun and well done game. So Shadow of War is like the sequel to that. I've not played through that one all the way yet, but I've started it. He asks, what are some Middle Earth related things you guys are into? Things that are not the books. I was always looking forward to more content, and thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Well,
thank you very much for that email, Andrew. Honestly, I have a hard time with it because growing up we played the wasn't it just called like the Return of the King, the Two Tower, like the GameCube games.
Return of the King, yeah.
Yeah, like we played those all the time growing up. That was a lot of fun. And then growing up as well, Sam and I played a lot of the Lord of the Rings trading card game by Decipher. And that was an absolute blast, but unfortunately it's out of print. Nobody plays it anymore. Like it's the two things that I personally really got into growing up are not around anymore. I have a hard time getting into any of the adaptations, at least thus far. And even the games that are coming out these days, I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a zealot in a way, but when things just start breaking the lore for entertainment purposes, I struggle with it. So I don't know. What about you, Sam? Other than you did say you played through Shadow of Mordor.
Yeah, I did play through Shadow of Mordor, and that's fun. It's definitely like not canonical in the sense of like timeline and everything, but it's just an entertaining game. You get to be this made up character that is tied to I'm forgetting the name now, Celebrimbor. And in the game he's sweet. He's ripped, he's got scars, like he's jacked, and then obviously not the Rings of Power version of Celebrimbor, but pretty much the idea is that like he's trying to get back at Sauron for deceiving him, and so he's connecting through this guy named Talion, and you walk through, like Talion dies, but he's connected to the Wraith, so he doesn't die. Like their life forms are connected together, and you just kind of have to go through and kill a bunch of orcs and eventually fight Sauron, but you can't obviously defeat Sauron because he doesn't lose yet.
Right.
It's like pretty much right before the events of Lord of the Rings is kind of when this is all supposed to take place. But I did send Andrew the link to the online version of the trading card game to see if he wanted to jump into that. But I feel like that's hard if you don't have anyone to like teach you how to build a deck or like without anyone to play with. But
well, and then on top of that, the people that do play online are like the hardest of hardcore people, and so they have just master decks that are nearly impossible to beat. So it's fun if you have somebody to play with just for fun, but after beyond that, it's pretty challenging.
Whoa.
Looks like we dropped you for a second, but you should be back.
All right. Yeah. Internet crashed for half a second there, it looked like.
You're good.
I think we're okay. Greg Bach is still in here.
So. Yeah, I do see our good friend Craig on Discord recording, making sure we are there for the audio listeners. So Sam, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes here. Today, as you can tell, probably by if you're on the video portion at least, we've got a couple of little slides up here of the map of Middle Earth, and we're going to be discussing the Battle of the Five Armies, how we got to the point of the Battle of the Five Armies in The Hobbit, and then what were the implications moving forward after the Battle of Five Armies. It played a big role in the War of the Ring and everything. So just to start us off, there's a few things that we need to keep in mind here. So why did it happen in the first place? Well, there's Gandalf's motives in meeting Thorin. They call it a chance meeting, as they say in Middle Earth. However, Gandalf was scared of the alliance between the potential alliance between Sauron and Smaug, the dragon of the Lonely Mountain that destroyed Erebor. And so Gandalf, this was like really weighing on his mind. He always wanted to figure out how do we get rid of that and get rid of that threat and prevent that union from taking place. And so he actually runs into Thorin and starts the quest for reclaiming the Lonely Mountain. However, to understand the depth of that decision for Thorin, we need to go back in time a little bit to quite frankly, right before the battle of the Orcs and the Dwarves. So to start us off, this is a little different than the movies. So if you've watched the movies, they really focus on Azog the Defiler, right? However, Azog, as you'll find out here in a minute, really wasn't the main character for the Hobbit timeline. He was before that during the War of the Orcs and the Dwarves. So Bolg is actually his son, and I think that's how you'd pronounce it, right? Just Bolg?
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
B-L-G. Yeah. Bolg.
Yeah, Bolg. He was actually the son of Azog, and he was actually killed by dying Ironfoot in the Battle of Azanulzabar in the year 2799 of the Third Age. And this was after Azog had murdered Thror, Thorin's grandfather. And so 48 years after the loss of Erebor, so this is 48 years after Smaug came in, chased all the dwarves out of Erebor, Thror attempted to reclaim Moria. He wanted to explore it. He basically was like, I'm sick of, doing generic smithying for pennies when I'm a king. I'm of the line of Durin. I deserve better. And so he's like, hey, let's go check out and see if what's going on in Moria. So he gets all the way up to the gate. And at this point, he only took one person with him. I forget the guy's name. It was like Nair or Nor or something like that. But there was just Nar, maybe. Yeah, that sounds right. So. There was just the two of them. And Azog actually grabs Thror and captures him. And with that, he decides to sever the head of Thror, and he etches into the face Azog, his name. And then he yells out to Thror's companion, and he basically calls him a beggar. He's like, we see you begging at the door. Here's, a little bit of compensation for your time. And he throws the head of Thror, and then he also throws just a tiny little purse of really non-valuable coins. And it's said that the name was branded into his heart and the hearts of dwarves afterwards, meaning the name of Azog. So the dwarves really hated Azog because, if you remember, like I mentioned earlier, Thror is of the line of Durin, the king of all dwarves. And so this is a horrible thing for them to experience. And with that, as he was walking away, I really should have wrote the guy's name. Or wait, no, I did write his name down. Nar, that is his name. Yeah. As he was walking away, he looked over his shoulder and saw Azog and the rest of the orcs just completely defiling the body of Thror. They were hacking him into pieces and tossing chunks to the crows. And so, yeah, it's tough. And so this really just stirred the hatred. Not that orcs and dwarves ever got along, but this really stirred the hatred of the dwarves here. And so he went back and he delivered Azog's message to the heirs of Thror, which was Thrain II and Thorin, who is at the time of The Hobbit. And so Thrain, son of Thror, decided to reunite all the dwarves, and he recruited as many as he could, dwarves from the Iron Hills, the Blue Mountains, pretty much anywhere that he could find dwarves, and he called them to him, and they went on this 60-year campaign going through the Misty Mountains, just attacking every orc stronghold that they could find, kind of working their way down from north to south in order to get to Moria. And eventually, as the war was coming to a close, it coalesced at the Battle of Azanulzabar, and that was right in front of the east gate of Moria, which is kind of just west of the Anduin. If you think the east gate is the side of the Misty Mountains where you have like Mirkwood and Lothlorien, as opposed to Rivendell. Mm-hmm. And so that's where this battle took place. And this battle was very interesting in that the dwarves were actually getting routed. The orcs had the high ground. They had a lot more numbers. They were heavily outnumbering the dwarves, and it was looking pretty bleak for the dwarves until Nine decided to show up. And this is Dine Ironfoot's father. He showed up with the dwarves of the Iron Hills, and they were fresh. They hadn't been campaigning nearly as long. They finally got there. However, Nine went up against Azog, and he was not murdered. He was slain in one-on-one combat. And with that, Dine Ironfoot chased him down. And after the battle of Azog and Nine, Dine Ironfoot ran up as Azog realized that the dwarves of the Iron Hills had tilted the field, and he realized that they were in trouble. So Azog was going to retreat. He was fleeing back into Moria, and Dine Ironfoot catches up to him, and he defeats him in one-on-one combat. And this was right at the gate, the east gate of Moria. And Tolkien actually says that when Dine walked down from the gate, it was said that he was gray in the face as someone who had felt great fear. And this battle, it really took a toll on the dwarves. They lost over half their people. And with the slaying of Azog, they were so distraught and frustrated about everything that had taken place that they beheaded Azog, stuck his head on a pike, and then took the small coin purse that Azog had originally thrown after killing Thror, and shoved it in his mouth. And the rest of the dwarves, they just wanted to leave. They wanted to be done with it. They didn't even have energy to bury their dead. They just burned them. And that, I think they actually refer to it in the movies, like being a burnt dwarf was a good thing. It was a sense of pride. However, Thrain, Thorin's father, was like, hey, we just killed all the orcs. Let's go back and reclaim Moria. Why not? And Dine Ironfoot, who had actually looked into Moria, looked at him and said, only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow, it awaits you still, Durin's Bane. And he's like, you'll have to come back another time. We can't do this. And so that's just a little bit of backstory between why the dwarves and the orcs hate each other so much. This was a 60-year campaign, and this is when Thorin is considered quite young at the time. He took part in these battles, but he was still quite young.
Yeah, and I think the movies did a decent job of like depicting. I know like the first movie, like kind of the prologue, they have this flashback of the whole battle of the Gates of Moria and stuff. Obviously, they convolute things with Azog and Dane, or Dine, I guess, however you want to pronounce it, wasn't even there in the movies. And so I don't know why they took that specific angle. Like, I don't know why they felt like they had to have this big protagonist in Azog when Bolg is just as good of a,
right,
I don't know, an enemy. But yeah, that's pretty intense hatred between the two of them. And obviously Durin's Bane, that's referring to the Balrog that's still hiding under the gates of Moria somewhere.
Yep.
But yeah, so then we get to kind of fast forward through the quest with the dwarves and with Bilbo. Obviously they go through and do all their things, but then we get all the way to them getting to the mountain, messing with Smaug. There's a really good interaction between Smaug and Bilbo that's really fun. And there's a lot of good dialogue in the books. But then Smaug goes and he's like, okay, I know Barrel Rider, that means you're from Lake Town. And so he goes out and he just kind of sets waste to Lake Town. And so he kind of does what he feels like he should have done a long time ago, is like keep teaching these men a lesson, that I'm still here, that I'm still a big bad thing.
You still need to fear me.
But
yeah,
you still need to fear me. So he flies over to Esgaroth and he begins to lay waste to Lake Town. But good old Bard, who is the descendant of what's that guy's Girion?
Girion. Yep. I think that's how you say it. When it comes to pronunciation, I have no clue.
Yeah, he ends up finding a black arrow, and he shoots it straight through the heart of Smaug, killing him. And with the rest of the survivors of Lake Town, that he's kind of like considered the leader of Lake Town now. So then they obviously are going to take up their people and try to survive because of the waste of their city. So they kind of head off into Erebor. But the other thing at play here that we need to pay attention to is the Arkenstone. Now, the Arkenstone is the whole reason that everyone's kind of wanting to chase down and go over to Erebor, because this was considered like the heart of the mountain, and it was prized by all the kings of dwarves and even like the men and the elves. They saw it as a sign of divine right to rule. If anyone who held the Arkenstone. So but again, when Smaug had come in and attacked Erebor the first time, the stone was lost among the horde. But then when Bilbo and Smaug are having their conversation, it was Bilbo's task to actually go find the Arkenstone, because that would allow Thorin to say, hey, Dane, you need to come back here and come help me out, because I have the Arkenstone. I am now the ruler. And so that was the plan. But so Bilbo actually finds the Arkenstone and brings it back. So talking about Bilbo, now Smaug he's dead. Lake Town's coming. Like all the men of Lake Town are coming over to Erebor to seek shelter, but also to get the riches that they kind of deserve. And also Bard's like, hey, you sent a dragon on us. We should probably get paid and recompense for that. But Bilbo kind of knew the stubbornness of Thorin and the likelihood of the battle that was about to happen. And so Bilbo, without telling anyone, took the Arkenstone as his 1/14th share of the treasure. And he actually offered it to Thranduil and Bard as a trade for Thorin. So he kind of sneaks out in the middle of the night and goes to their encampment and tries to trade with them.
He knows that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, yeah. I was gonna say the reason, like, he knows that this is the one thing that Thorin is seeking after the most, and that if maybe Thorin like sees, oh, they have the Arkenstone, sure, whatever, I'll pay whatever I need to get that back, and maybe we won't have this big old battle. But not exactly how things go down, because Thranduil, the king of the Mirkwood Elves, they didn't treat the dwarves so kindly when they were taking their journey through Mirkwood. They were actually kept in the dungeons of Thranduil and captured and pretty much refused to be let go for the reason of like just kind of their quest. And like again, Thranduil was like, I don't like dwarves anyway. I can wait as long as I need to decide like what to do. You guys are, mortal, even though you live a long time. I can sit here and wait for a long time. You guys can rot in my cells. Pretty much is what his thought process was. But Thorin was worried that Thranduil would stop them from attempting their quest or demand a portion of the treasure to let them go. So he's being stubborn and Thranduil's being stubborn, and so ultimately they're just kind of sitting in the dungeon. But then Bilbo, who's using the power of the ring, kind of sneaks in, ends up rescuing the dwarves and finding a way out through the wine cellar, which again is one of my favorite parts of the book. It's just a fun little interaction. Bilbo's like talking to himself, and also like I don't know, it's fun. But again, they're rescued by Bilbo, and then they are able to continue on in their quest. But if you don't know who Thranduil is, he's the father of Orifor, or Thranduil's father, Orifer, was an elf of Doriath in the First Age. And this means that Orifer was present during the fall of Doriath and the murder of Elu Thingol by the dwarves, originally commissioned to fix the Silmaril of Beren into the Nauglamir. So we have a really wide tie-in. Again, elves and dwarves don't like each other for many, many reasons, but obviously with Thranduil's dad, who would have been like connected with Elu Thingol, who obviously got killed by the dwarves because he tried to claim the Silmaril and the Nauglamir, and it's just a whole mess. But there's a lot of backstory that The Hobbit, even though this was like the first work of Tolkien, he puts in, and then he just like unloads a huge lore trails around it, like forward and backward. You can go backwards through the First and Second Age, you go forward through the Third Age, and you see how important this one little tiny children's book really is to the Legendarium.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think about that. I mean, we all know the phrase, like in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, right? And Tolkien just kind of scribbled that on a blank sheet of paper and was, like, oh, maybe I should write something about a hobbit. I don't know what a hobbit is. Let's figure it out. But he had this wider world in his head. And so he even said in some of his letters that it wasn't the Hobbit was not intended to be tied to his greater legendarium that he had been building already up until this point. It was just something fun that popped into his head, but he was so encapsulated with this story and this world that he created that it somehow just fit in. And Lord of the Rings obviously wasn't written yet, and so he was not commissioned, but he was requested by the publisher, like, hey, The Hobbit was a hit. You need a sequel. And he was like, well, I wasn't planning to do a sequel. How do I make a sequel out of something that shouldn't have a sequel? Like, this was a standalone story. And you can just see the brilliance that he has, both, like you said, creating the tie-ins from the first and second age, and then also continuing on into the third age. He just brought it in full circle. And it definitely makes sense to me, kind of switching topics here a little bit, why the dwarves and the elves hate each other so much. We, like Sam and I had mentioned, they never got along great, because going all the way back to Aule and creating the dwarves out of Eru's desire, if you will, he knew it was going to happen. He's what is the term? Sure. Omniscient. Omniscient, right? Yeah. Omnipotent, one of the two. Yeah. I forget which is which, but he knew it was going to happen, but it wasn't really what he wanted to happen necessarily. But so there was always going to be friction. However, the slaying of Eluthingal by the dwarves when they were trying to steal the Nauglamir is really, really what put a bad taste in the mouths of the two races. And so it definitely makes sense why Thorin doesn't really trust Thranduil, and he doesn't want to tell him what the actual name of the quest is, what their goals are, what they're trying to do, because Thranduil is not gonna go for it. He's probably gonna keep holding him, and so there's all this friction. So there's a ton of things that kind of coalesce into this Battle of the Five Armies. So what I'd like to do now is go over to kind of this slideshow that's quite frankly quite poorly put together. I thought I was going to be able to just flip through each picture individually, but I just made these quick slides to help give a little bit of a visual for people that are trying to understand what's going on during the Battle of the Five Armies. So as you can see on this bottom slide here, we have the Company of Thorin and One, and they're hanging out in Erebor. We have Bard of Laketown and the Men of Laketown coming up from Esgaroth, and as number 2, and then the Thranduil of Mirkwood and the Woodland Elves at number 3. And so with that, it's pretty telling that Thorin is not willing to just give up any of his treasure. He thinks it's all his. But something to keep in mind too is Dale, the town of Dale, was sacked by Smaug and looted by Smaug. And so Bard, as the descendant of Girion, that's some of his treasure too. It's not only Thorin's. Yeah. And he tries to make this point, but Thorin won't have it. So you can see why, Bard is a little bit frustrated, and he's like, we deserve some of this. Plus we need to rebuild our city, our town, and it's coming close to winter. Mm-hmm. We need help, financing how to do this. And then, like you were saying, Thranduil is basically like, hey, what's going on? I hear the dragon's dead. Let's see what we can get. And so with that, Thranduil basically says, no treasure will come back through Mirkwood without me having some say in the matter, which is kind of just an arrogant jerk way of going about it, because you're like, really? None of it belongs to you, but you're going to insert yourself in there. And then what else we have to look at is we have Dying Ironfoot of the Iron Hills from up here on the northeast of the map. And then eventually we will have the arrival of the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, where they traverse across the Grey Mountains, the Arid Mithrim, kind of between the northern borders of Mirkwood and the southern borders of the Grey Mountains. They in secret gather and traverse across, and they work their way all the way down around to the southern point of Erebor, or the Lonely Mountain. And so this is kind of where everything is coming from. Eventually the Eagles arrive, which is probably Gandalf's doing. However, it says that they were spying out the Orcs and saw all the mobilization, and they're just kind of aware of everything, right? They're the eyes of Manwë, so they're aware. But I think Gandalf had something to do with it. And then number
Probably.
2 is Beorn that decides to show up, and he really turns the tide. And I gotta give some props to Peter Jackson's Hobbit. I really didn't like it that much, but Beorn getting airdropped in from an eagle, even though that's not how it happened, is probably one of the coolest scenes that I've seen.
Yeah, where you just make the transformation like midair into the bear and just starts whipping the orcs around. Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it's awesome. So it's just important to keep in mind too that Bolg is the one that's leading the orcs. So he hates the dwarves because of the slaying of his father. He hates the dwarves because of the slaying of the Goblin King. Right, when earlier in the Hobbit, when the company of Thorin passed through the Misty Mountains and was captured, and they slayed the Goblin King. And so there's a lot of just moving parts. And like Sam said, Bard shows up. He demands, recompense for, first of all, slaying the dragon. None of this could happen if he didn't slay the dragon. Part of the treasure should be his. And then Thranduil actually stops his advance to the mountain to help the people of Esgaroth. So I feel like Thranduil is portrayed poorly in a big way, but he also, came to the aid of the people of Esgaroth as well. So those are kind of the 3 main factions. You've got, like I said, if we look back at that first picture, you've got Thorin and company hanging out in Erebor. They've blockaded themselves in, and then you've got Bard and Thranduil that are creating a siege basically of the mountain.
Yeah, and so obviously we have everyone kind of culminating at the mountain, and they're having this discourse. And again, Bard and Thranduil are like, "Hey, just share some of the treasure. Everything's gonna be fine." And Thorin's like, "No, like we're gonna fight." And I think I kind of imagine like Bard and Thranduil like, "Okay, we've got hundreds of men and elves here. You're what, 13 plus maybe a hobbit who, oh, by the way, he's actually on our side now." But Thorin refuses because he's under the influence of dragon sickness, and this is one of the things that Tolkien kind of fleshes out a little bit. It's greed unending, really, is what this looks like. It's, you think of a dragon, you think of what Smaug did, and you see, okay, he goes in, he destroys everything, piles up a bunch of gold, and sits on it. Like that's really what he does.
I think Tolkien also mentions that like the gold that is, if you get the gold that a dragon's been sitting on, like the longer the dragon sits on it, the stronger the dragon sickness is as well. Doesn't he kind of flesh that out a
Yeah,
little bit?
yeah, I'm pretty sure there's something about that too. But because of this, his decision making is all out of whack. He has trust issues. He's riddled with selfishness, and all he thinks is, okay, I'm king under the mountain. That's how this is going to stay. All this belongs to me. You can't have anything. So he obviously gets mad at the elves for involving themselves, and again, remembering what they did to him earlier and how they were just going to let him rot in their dungeons. But then he's also mad at that Lake Town and Bard because they're starting to like, all right, well, if you won't share, we're gonna lay siege to Erebor, and we're eventually gonna get you guys out of there. um,
Or they'll starve to
but
death.
Thorin actually, or they're, yeah, starved to death, exactly. So Thorin uses a raven, Roak, son of Kark, which it's cool. Like ravens have names
Yeah.
in Lord of the Rings or in the Hobbit, you know. But he sends this raven out to Dane, Dine Ironfoot, his cousin, to say, "Hey, we need you. We need you. We're about to get attacked by a bunch of people. Please come to our aid." And so the plan was that as soon as Dine comes, that Thorin and his little band of 13 would go out and attack the men of Esgaroth and the elves of Mirkwood as soon as his cousin arrives. But as we see this kind of happen, it's really interesting in the book how like they're laying siege to the mountain. Dane comes down off this hill, and they're like, okay, like change directory, like we're gonna fight the dwarves. Like they're about to fight, and then Gandalf just appears out of nowhere. Like it literally says in the book, like
Yeah.
he just appeared and stood there like he was there the whole time, and he said halt. He said halt really really loudly. He took his staff, smashed it, bright lights just like he would have with the Nazguls. He's like, hey guys, look, like we're under attack from something else because Bolg is on his way with wargs and wolves from the mountains of the north, because he's sneaking down Ravenhill to begin his assault in the southern part of Erebor, which I think Seth's pulling up here. Um, but again, he's wanting to reclaim the strategic position of the mountain, and he also wants to get revenge on the line of Durin for what happened to his dad. So here's where we're gonna have a little just quick discourse. The battle worms or the weir worms that we see in Peter Jackson's rendition, which we saw some interesting creatures in Peter Jackson's rendition of The Hobbit that really don't have much place in what Tolkien probably would have wanted, but they use the weirworms to kind of dig through under the mountain and come out like a kind of surprise attack that way. They're mentioned once, I think, by Sam or one of the hobbits saying, like, even if I have to go fight the weirworms of the north or whatever it is, like, I will go. That's really the only mention of it. Do you know anything more about the weirworm, Seth, or why Peter Jackson was like, okay, I'm going to take that and we're going to use it?
I really don't know. The I looked it up a little bit because I was like, I don't think that was actually in the book, and it wasn't in the book. And then I was like, okay, but I know it was mentioned, and it's what you're talking about. I forget exactly what the quote was, but it's something along the lines of it's mentioned along a couple other things like the Dumbledores and like some interesting other
that's
creatures that.
Thing.
Well, I know, but apparently the Dumbledores are like an insect or something that are in the Shire
Really?
at one point. Yeah, which I didn't know. I found that out after looking at the. I think I looked at Tolkien Gateway or whatever for the wereworms. But
okay,
I mean, could they exist? Sure. I kind of wish Tolkien would have gone into them a little bit more because I like the idea of that's partly how they were able to sneak attack. You know, because somehow what still doesn't make a ton of sense to me if you look at the picture here of the Lonely Mountain. The orcs came from across the northern border of Mirkwood and then somehow snuck around, and most of the fighting took place in the south part of the Lonely Mountain. So it's like, it would have made sense if they were, had these wereworms that could dig tunnels and then just spring up out of nowhere, because these three armies had no idea until, like you said, Gandalf just appeared.
Right. I kind of like what Peter Jackson did with it, but it is interesting that like he's like, yeah, why not? Like I think he just didn't care. Especially with the Battle of Five Armies, he just was wild. Like you've got that whole scene with the goat chariots and the troll with like the battering ram on his head, just like a one and done kind of thing. I don't know. I think
one and done.
Yeah, he just rams his head into the wall and he's dead.
Yep.
I don't know. It's just funny. But all in all, right there, the Battle of Five Armies commences and starts with Thorin and his 13 dwarves, or 12, I guess, 13 with him, dying Ironfoot and his 500 dwarves, Bard and his 200 men, and Thranduil with his 1,000 elves. And then what they were trying to do is they wanting to lure the orcs into a choke point and deliver a massive blow to them, which did work for the most part at the beginning. But then the orcs were able to climb the mountain and attack from above and behind, and so the battle began to turn against the allies. And this is when you obviously see things kind of turning around. And we don't know how many orcs were there, but obviously whenever there's orcs fighting, especially goblins, there's just a mass number of them. So even if they're not as skilled as maybe an Ironfoot dwarf or Mirkwood elf, like they're swarming.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we weren't really given a number, but you can just assume that it's an insane amount. And even though, what do we have? 1,000 elves. So you have, give or take, 1,700 good guys, if you will. And I'm sure that there's at least twice that many orcs, at least. And like Sam mentions, they do initially, create heavy losses for the orcs in that choke point, but they just get overwhelmed. They get attacked on two fronts. And this is, again, something now that I think about it, I have to give a little bit of credit to Peter Jackson with Thorin actually having a change of mind, because up until this point he's just still barricaded in Erebor. He's like, whatever happens out there is fine, I'm now king under the mountain again. And it's very selfish, like Sam was describing. And so I do like it, and I maybe should go back and rewatch it, but doesn't Feely or Keely, one of them, like kind of convince him like they're all out there dying and we're in here just watching? Isn't it something like that?
Yeah, pretty much what goes down is they're like, hey, we're gonna go out there. Like these are our brother, like these are our cousins, these are our relatives that are dying for us while we're just sitting in here. And then there's this whole scene with Thorin, and he has like a reflection moment on the golden floor, and he's like repeating himself, I'm not my father, I'm not my grandfather. He throws off the crown, kind of awakens like oh my gosh, what am I doing? And he throws off like all the royal robes and everything, and just goes out with his rags, really, with his company.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love how he kind of comes into his own, right? And
Hmm.
at that moment, they burst asunder the wall that they had created to box themselves in, and Thorn goes rushing out, and he just starts shouting, to me, elves and men, to me, oh my kinsfolk. And you can imagine, like, you're in the heat of this battle, you're getting beat down, all of a sudden it's looking really dire for you guys, and then out of nowhere you hear that booming voice of the heir to Durin, right? Just shouting out. And what's really cool is Thorin just, like, for lack of a better term, no F's given. Like, even
Yeah.
though he's got 13, they just go straight for Bolg and the bodyguard of Bolg. They don't,
Hmm.
they, like, if you think about it, I kind of think of it as in the Silmarillion with the I think it's a battle of unnumbered tears where,
The beginning of it, yeah,
what
where
is
they
it,
make that
Gelmir?
charge.
Or no, it's Gwendor, right? Yeah, it's Gwendor,
Yes,
because of the
yes,
hewing of
yes,
his brother, like, charges in and
yeah.
actually gets to the gates of Angband, but then realizes they're surrounded, and they
Hmm.
fought so far in that the armies bowed behind them. That's kind of how I
Yeah,
imagine this. And so,
probably very similar. Yeah.
yeah, so Thorin just goes straight for it, and he actually does, gives out huge casualties to the orcs, fights all the way up to the bodyguard of Bolg. But at that point, kind of like we were describing, the other forces kind of encircle them, and you realize, like, oh, that was a horrible idea. And at this point, that's actually where the eagles arrive, and Beorn also arrives, and this is what really turns the tide. And
Mm.
what I love is is the description that he gives of Beorn. Like, it's insane. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt here. Hopefully I don't stumble over my words too much. I'm not great at reading out loud, and it's a couple paragraphs, but it's just too good not to read. And so this is in
Yeah.
regard to Beorn showing up, and it says, the roar of his voice was like drums and guns, which drums and guns, guns, it's like meets back on the menu, boys. How do orcs know what a menu is? Drums
Yeah.
and guns. Anyways, uh and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers. He fell upon their rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a stand about their lords upon a low rounded hill. Then Beorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. And so Beorn runs in, just completely decimates everything in his path. Just one bear man. At this point, he's a bear, but decimates everything in his path. Grabs Thorin, who is basically wounded to the death at this point, and takes him away. And then he's just with full of rage. And Tolkien says, swiftly he returned, and his wrath was redoubled, so that nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Bolg himself and crushed him.
Crazy. Just destroys him. He's a cheat code, really.
Yeah. He's like, when you go into Madden and you're like 99 this, 99 this, 99 that, like that's Beorn.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
wish Tolkien would have
Crazy.
used the Bjornings more,
Hmm.
just because they're so cool. Like, a guy that can transform into a giant bear and can fight
Yep.
like that. I mean, it's incredible. Um,
I wanted to name, if we have another son in the future, I wanted to name him Beorn, and so we'd have Baron and Beorn.
yeah,
Ariel was like,
Bear
"You have
isn't great.
one enough." Yeah, like you
I'm
have
trying to
one
talk
Tolkien character.
Amanda.
You don't need any more.
If we have a daughter, I'm trying to talk Amanda into Eowyn. She's like, that's a really pretty name, but no.
Mm,
So we'll see.
really?
We'll see.
Dang.
um, but this battle wasn't without loss. Like I had mentioned, Thorin is
Yeah.
wounded to the death. He is absolutely just pierced with spears, and he's dying. And unfortunately, both Fili and Kili, who are his nephews, they die as well. And that kind of ends that line of Durin, that side of the line of Durin. And his cousin, Dine Ironfoot, becomes the new king under the mountain after the battle.
Yeah, and before we move on, I just wanted to share the interaction between Thorin and Bilbo because it's so pure, and it's one of those like culminating moments that if you have to have a hero die, like this is the way to do it. Again, with that like kind of redemption that he got from the overcoming the dragon sickness and then getting to this point here. Um, I'll just kind of read it from the book here. So Bilbo, he was knocked out conveniently during this whole
Yeah.
thing. Like he sees the orcs coming and he's like, "Oh, cool! Like there's a battle." And then a goblin threw a rock and hit him on the head and knocked him out.
And he
So
had the ring on when that happened.
yeah. So he was completely invisible the whole time. Nobody knew where he was. But he comes to and he realized, oh, there was a very massive battle and a lot of people died. I'm gonna go check on everybody. He realizes that Thorin is on his deathbed here, and so Bilbo knelt on one knee, filled with sorrow. "Farewell, King under the mountain," he said. "This is a bitter adventure if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I've shared in your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves." "No," said Thorin, "there is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage, some wisdom, blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave now. Farewell." I
I
mean,
love that.
that's one of those things I hold on to. Yeah, yeah. It's such a beautiful depiction of what I think we kind of the same thought process we should have. Like food and cheer and song, like above hoarded gold. There's so many battles being worn, like so many battles, so many wars being held in the name of resources, and it's just like let's just value food and cheer and song.
Yeah. I,
It's good.
I love how he says child of the kindly West as well. He's
Yeah,
basically saying like your people are pure. Like you guys are absolutely pure compared to all this craziness that happens out east, east of the Misty Mountains, Mirkwood, the Lonely Mountain, Smaug, Sauron, Isengard, all of that. He's like, you child of the kindly West. That's so beautiful because in that little phrase, he perfectly encapsulates the Shire.
yeah, 100%. And he left that to journey and be a part of something so crazy and so honestly dangerous. And he even says to himself, like he turns away, he wraps himself in a blanket, and he starts crying. And he talks to himself. He says, "A mercy it is," he said at last to himself, "that I woke up when I did. I wish Thorin were living, but I'm glad that we parted in kindness." Because again, his last interaction was realizing just how sick Thorin was with dragon sickness. And so he gets to have this special moment of remembering the king under the mountain as he should have been.
Yeah.
But then he says, "You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he says to himself. "You made a great mess of that business with the stone, and there was a battle in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet. But I suppose you can hardly be blamed for that." He kind of realizes, like, maybe I was to blame. No, that was going to happen regardless.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you're like, I think I'm more important than I really am. And then you realize, no, I'm not that important. I didn't cause all of this.
Right. Yeah. So with the help of Beorn and the Eagles and all the men, they can rally together. They defeated the armies of Gundabad and Goblin Town and all the wargs and the bats as well. So here's kind of where we see this whole the book itself, but especially this battle and how it has implications on the War of the Ring or Lord of the Rings. And so, again, as we mentioned before, The Hobbit was written well before Lord of the Rings, and as Seth said, wasn't really supposed to be a part of all of this. But because it was so good, people wanted it to be a part of. Well, they asked for a sequel, and he had already been working on all this other stuff, and in his genius, he was able to just put it all together. But it's really amazing how he did it. But one thing that we kind of wanted to talk about here is the thing that Gandalf, not only he feared Sauron, we know that he didn't want to even come to Middle Earth because of Sauron, right? He was afraid of Sauron. Um, but then he thinks, okay, Sauron plus dragon equals destruction. And you think of like how Morgoth used Glaurung, which I think Smaug, because he can fly, maybe has a bit more of an advantage to Sauron than Glaurung might have had. But he
Then the
just knows, okay,
father of
you add a dragon
dragons.
to the mix. Well, he can fly.
Yeah, true.
I think that's a pretty big advantage.
That is a pretty big advantage.
I mean, he can breathe fire and he can fly. Glaurung, sure, the father of dragons, but you just stab him in the belly and he's done for, right? So, but anyway, it's a very strategic. Like the mountain itself is a very strategic position. the fortress built into the mountain. Like, this is a really good stronghold if Sauron were to take advantage of it, and where it is just on the map of Middle Earth. Like, Gandalf knows that Sauron can't have this. If he does, we're in for a really, really big mess, and especially if he gets a dragon along with it. And so that's kind of the whole idea behind the quest, and then obviously the Battle of the Five Armies there as well. But Seth posed the question: would Sauron have known about Smaug? I think he probably would have, just from hearing about the story of the sacking of Erebor and Dale and Lake Town and all that.
Well,
But again,
I think he would have known
go ahead.
him, but would he have known? He would have known him. However, let me rephrase. He would have known of him. Would he have known him? Do you think that they
Oh,
were
okay.
in any kind of
Personally, yeah.
communication leading up to this?
Well, that's where I wonder, like with the dragon sickness, if Smaug really cared to leave his
Yeah.
hoard. You know, he had everything he wanted. He had the heart of the mountain somewhere in his hoard. He had his gold. He didn't really need to do anything. I mean, even as Bill was talking to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, I should probably go pay the men of Lake Town a visit. It's been a long time since I've been the the big bad worm that I'm supposed to be." So, unless Sauron could maybe have bribed him with something that he like, maybe a promise or some other jewels, or in the same way that like Morgoth used Ungoliant. Like, I kind of wonder if there's like that kind of a
A little bit of
relationship.
a parallel
Like
there.
Smaug, yeah, Smaug wouldn't have like bowed to Sauron as like a servant, but he might have been willing to be used by him for personal gain. Is my guess. But,
Okay. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I like the point that you made about, did he even care? Like, he's
right.
sitting on a hoard of treasure, which is, we know that's what dragons want to do, and he's just chilling. Nobody's a threat to him. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Kind of like Sam's talking about, though, one of the big advantages is the decreased number of orcs that were in the northern mountains. And during the War of the Ring, we actually find in the Unfinished Tales, there's a little excerpt. I don't know if it's in the appendices. It might be. Excuse me. But it's Gandalf talking about what happened in the north during the War of the Ring, and everything that's, you know, the Battle of the Pelennor and all the assault on Gondor and everything. And Gandalf's kind of talking about what happens up north, and the attacks. There were attacks on both Lothlorien and Dale, and both of them were able to be defeated, and which otherwise they would have been overwhelmed if these. I mean, again, we don't know how many orcs were destroyed during this time period, but you can imagine it set back those, I don't want to say, like, colonies of orcs. What would you, bands of tribes, whatever you want to call them. It would have set them back from a population standpoint in a very large way to lose that many. And so it was a huge deal, because after the Battle of the Pelennor and everything, Gandalf actually talks about dying Ironfoot and how he dies. So basically what happened is a bunch of Easterlings and orcs still attacked Dale, the newly reformed, rebuilt Dale. And I think it Bard's grandson potentially was killed. Was it his grandson? I think it was.
Would make sense, yeah.
But I don't really remember. But I'll just read another little excerpt here, because this is Gandalf talking about dying Ironfoot. So actually, I know Thorin is really like the king under the mountain, blah, 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 blah. But if you think of it, look at their two lives, dying Ironfoot kills Azog, and then he also becomes king under the mountain. And when you hear this description, it, like, he was a BA dwarf. He was really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
So Gandalf says, this is about the death of dying Ironfoot. He says, and now we hear that he fell fighting before Erebor again. This is the second time he's fought before Erebor. Even while we fought here, I should call it a heavy loss if it were not such a wonder that at his great age, which is 250 years old, he could still wield an axe as mightily as they say he did, standing over the body of King Brand before the gate of Erebor until the darkness fell. And
you got to know that guy was doing his squats. I mean, come on,
bro,
250 and he's still swinging that axe. Let's go.
Yeah, it's impressive. I love that description, especially, again, the bond between the dwarves and the men. I mean, you know, there was mutual enrichment, if you will, from the original Lonely Mountain in Erebor and the Kingdom of Dale, and they were able to rebuild that and get back to like pre-Smaug times. And just at 250 years old, he's still standing over the body of the king of Dale and fighting to protect just the body. Um, and then Gandalf goes on to just explain like the actual implications. He said it might have gone very differently indeed. The main attack was diverted southwards, it is true. Yet even so, with his far-stretched right hand, Sauron could have done terrible harm in the north. While we defended Gondor, if King Brand and King Dain had not stood in his path, if they had not stood in his path, when you think of the great battle of the Pelennor, do not forget the battle of Dale. Think what might have been. Dragonfire and savage swords in Eriador. There might be no queen in Gondor. We might now only hope to return from victory here to ruin and ash, but all that has been averted because I met Thorin Oakenshield one evening on the edge of spring, not far from Bree, a chance meeting, as we say in Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love how, again, there's just little strings of yarn connecting so many different big stories and battles, and yeah, it all kind of comes back to, yeah, I met Thorin Oakenshield in a chance meeting.
Yeah,
And Gandalf, I mean, you don't give him enough credit. Maybe you do. I don't. He's so wise. Like he's very discerning, but he's also got this like humility about him as a
yeah,
character too, that he's willing to let other people with specific gifts kind of lead out in the ways that they should. He supports them and builds them up in order to do the things that only they could do. He's definitely a mover in Middle Earth. Like he's a connector and a mover, especially as like with the Eagles and stuff too. Just having that influence, like he does a lot more than maybe you think of just when you're just looking at the story itself. But you step back, you look at the entire, you know, the entire Third Age. It's kind of Gandalf's story in a way.
well, and it is. And if you remember too, Aragorn at the end of Return of the King, he basically says this is an end to his labors. This is what he was sent for. And he is the only Astari that stayed true to their commission to Middle Earth. They were sent to be not overt magic users, not great warriors, but they were sent to enhance the wisdom and bring hope to the free peoples of Middle Earth against Sauron. And Radagast obviously failed. Alatar and Palando, nobody knows what happened to them, except maybe Rings of Power will tell us. Who knows? And then Sauron obviously failed miserably, but Gandalf really stayed true to his purpose. And like you said, he was the mover. He did everything. And even Aragorn says, like, this is his victory.
Yeah, and amidst all that wisdom, he somehow just doesn't realize that Bilbo has this, very powerful one ring that he's just like, okay, yeah, you keep that, take that back with you as a little, heirloom, or it's like, all right, why couldn't he discern that that was something more important? I mean, again, that was written and it wasn't supposed to connect, but then it does in a very big way. Like Bilbo keeping the ring, keeping it away from Sauron. Sauron's whole bent, like all his mind is bent on finding this ring, and it's in the Kindly West of
Right.
all places it could be. It's taken from Gollum in the Misty Mountains, and Gollum was around orcs all the time. Like it could have easily one day he could have slipped up and one of the orcs found it, and it could have been easily passed over to Sauron, but because Bilbo intervened and because he took the ring all the way to the Kindly West and kind of allowed goodness to thrive a little bit longer until Sauron obviously became powerful enough to just start wreaking havoc regardless of the ring's power. It really does play a really big role into everything. Sorry, you can probably hear Bear
That's all
just
right.
whining in the background, but Ariel's doing his, I can hear her like, shh, quiet. Thanks,
It's
honey.
all good. It's all good.
But yeah, it really is. I mean, the Hobbit's a fun book. It's a fun book. It's one that I probably start with Bear here pretty soon, just to read aloud to him. But it's got really big implications for the trilogy itself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I was gonna say we have a little bit of time left, 5, 10, 15 minutes, somewhere in there. What do you think about transitioning? I should have probably mentioned this to you before we started, but we could watch the Rings of Power trailer together and just give quick thoughts on that now that we're at the end of actual Tolkien lore.
Sure.
So,
Before we do, I do have one. Sorry, I do have one question for you.
yes, sir.
How did Azog have a son? What does that mean?
I mean, they have to reproduce, right? Like, as Rings of Power
How?
showed
I
us,
don't get it.
there's orc women that we, need to feel
Okay.
pity for.
Right.
There are orc women, right?
They don't just spring up out of the ground and holes in the ground.
Not quite like they do in Isengard, I don't believe.
Yeah.
Peter
I just was
Jackson's
like,
yeah. That's a good
we're not
question.
gonna go into that.
That's a good
I don't know.
question. I mean, the evil cannot create, it can only mock and destroy, right? So it
Right.
can twist things, and I assume that is no different.
Sure.
I assume that is no different. Yeah, good
Ugh,
question.
yuck.
Good
Anyway,
question. Give me the ick, as the kids would say these days. The ick.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Look at
Um,
you. Up
let me
to date with
switch
the times.
over to this scene here. So you can see my screen, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
In Discord. It's probably kind of small for you, but
That's all right.
I have the trailer pulled up here. Let's just start it over.
I
And
have some
if you
copyright
want,
issues here if you play this. Oh boy.
no, I think as long as you
Okay,
pause it
there's-
every couple seconds, it doesn't matter. I don't even know. We don't make money off this podcast anyways. What are they gonna do? So
Come after us.
if something stands out to you, just tell me to hit pause, and we'll chat about it.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Okay, this is. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I don't think I've seen it all the way through. Actually.
sees himself
You
as
have it?
master of all Middle Earth.
I don't think so.
Did they get
Okay,
those
there's
out
two
of?
rings.
Did they get those out of like one of those, like you put a quarter in and twist it, like they used to have at
I was thinking
Walmart, and you pop it
Claire's.
open? Claire's. Okay.
You know,
He seeks
like
to
little
rule it
kids
not only
clothing.
through conquest.
Okay, so that's Sauron's helmet.
But by
thing.
bending the minds of all its peoples to his
It's a
own.
dwarf with a lot of rings. There's great value Anatar, or
That he makes
Adar.
not armies. No! But rings.
Why is she being tempted to? Oh, okay.
So why is Elrond telling Galadriel no for the ring?
Couldn't tell you.
The three rings
She's
were
probably on this power trip that she's like, oh, I need to use whatever I can, but that's not exactly what they were used for. Like that's
yeah. And which something
silly.
to keep in mind too is this is always clever editing, so that might be a scene of Elrond
Yeah.
yelling no at something completely unrelated to this scene. But why would she be apprehensive? Because Sauron never touched the ring, that they weren't corrupted.
Right. Yeah, they're pure.
In choosing to wear those rings, you have all become his collaborators.
I know
Oh,
you
really?
believe this ring is
They've all
deceiving
become
me,
his collaborators for wearing the rings.
but I believe it is guiding me.
All this may be
It's a
by
cool looking
his
orc.
design.
Okay.
Yeah, that orc wasn't too bad.
These rings may be how he attains power. They must be destroyed.
We will discuss the rings once you have answered the question.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but they never talked about actually destroying the rings, ever.
No. And why is Gil-galad always so mean to Galadriel? Like,
I mean, she's kind of easy to be mean to.
I mean,
I'll
I know
just
she's
phrase
not a
it that
likable
way.
character, but that was never the like Gil-galad's a dope character in the books. That
Oh,
just
he is.
looks like this dumb patriarch. Like, oh, I'm a dude, and so
I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to be wrong because you're the strong woman.
yeah.
Who is this man?
He is no man.
I am no man.
He
Oh.
Oh, we got some barrow whites. Okay.
So
Is that what we're
Sam,
looking at here?
you did a video on the Barrow-wights last
Did
year,
you?
year before. That was actually very
Uh-huh.
good. The audio of it, and I enjoyed putting together the visual part.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Barrow-wights briefly. Summarize it real quick. Should they be here?
They probably shouldn't be here because they were, I mean, pretty much like a creation of the Witch King. Really, is where it all began, and we don't have a Witch King yet.
Correct.
The Witch King is yet to be. I guess you could just say, oh, these are other like wraiths that are just, but they're obviously like they're just playing off of interesting characters that you would want to see maybe on screen that people have said all the time, oh, like I wish Peter Jackson would have put the Bear Whites in there in in the Fellowship of the Ring. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, if everybody wants that, we'll just do it here.
Yeah.
Except it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. They've broken this timeline into a million pieces and they're just throwing it back together however they want. Real quick, my guess about that. What is that little kid's name? The annoying original little kid that just gets in trouble. That he's still going to be the Witch King. I still think so.
I can see that. Yeah.
He deceived me. Was Galadriel ever deceived by Sauron?
No, she was the only one that wasn't deceived by Sauron. Actually.
Her, Gil-galad, and Círdan, and Elrond, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, he's got a wig on. Nobody knows who he is.
Who are you?
A sharer of gifts.
A sharer of gifts. Isn't he supposed to be the giver of gifts?
Begins now.
Yeah, that's probably copyright. Couldn't use it.
Is this not Tatooine from Star Wars?
It does look like it, yeah.
I have walked across mountains
Sand
and
people.
deserts.
Yeah.
Is that what those are? Sand
I
people?
think those are the Tusken Raiders in Middle Earth.
One the fate of the world may depend on.
Oh yeah, the Harfoots.
Is it my task
Yay.
to stop the fire? Is it my task to face Sauron?
Oh, it's Tom Bombadil.
To try and cheat death? Might lead to an even greater catastrophe. Father,
What's the plan here?
take off the ring.
This month, wow.
I'm afraid.
I'll be honest, the visuals look like they could be pretty cool.
Yeah, the CGI is really good. The landscapes, like the rooms that they create, it's very well done, and that's probably where all the money went because it didn't go to acting or dialogue or script writing.
True.
Every soul in Middle Earth is in peril. Will you abandon them to their doom?
Jolly old Tom. Jolly old Tom doesn't care about
That's
anything outside
Why
of
would
his
he be in
realm.
Rune? Why would he be in Rune? His whole thing is not desert, it's life.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point.
To me.
Promise me, Elrond.
Okay, so we got lit up there.
He will
That's
not
cool.
stop until he is destroyed.
Okay, Galadriel having a little flame here?
Forgiveness.
Oh yeah,
That-
put the hat on, Tom. There you go.
That's Gandalf's hat. Does he like
Oh.
Indiana Jones it where he...
Oh, for sure.
Forgiveness
Got to be.
takes an age.
Ah, an int wife.
Use your axe, old friend.
Wonder if it shows him getting burned alive in the east.
That's supposed to be Sheila right there?
Is he in Mirkwood?
I
When
don't
the
know.
darkness falls, there are always some who rise forth and shine.
That's okay. Evil.
Weren't they
Saturn
constructing a Region in the last
You
season?
will give me the nine.
Now it's just
Yeah.
completely done.
It's done for. Double shot. Finally, some elven talk. There you go.
How's their armor look? I'm curious.
It's fine.
I mean, the Númenórean armor was far inferior to
Oh
the
yeah.
Gondorian armor.
Huh. Well,
Well,
they showed a lot. Honestly, I'm surprised they showed that much because they did not show that much. I feel like the first season, and there's my fool of a took Pippin there.
there's your fool of a took.
Yeah, this is interesting. I feel like I will have to watch it just to make fun of it, but I also don't think I want to. Like the whole reason they can have another season is because of how many people watched it, and
Well, they
mean,
signed a
I'm
5-year
interested enough to-
contract.
that's true. But there was a crap ton of people that watched it, and most of them were just hate watching.
Only a
picking
third of the
out
people
all the
that
lore
watched the
issues and-
only a third of the people that watched the first season finished the 8th, or the first episode watched the 8th episode.
episode.
I don't know, man. It's soon though.
I know this month. That's kind of wild. I really did not think it was gonna make another season. I am impressed, I guess, or shocked, or horrified.
I guess we'll find out when it comes out, huh?
All the above. Yeah, let us know your all's thoughts on the trailer. I mean, again, like you said, the visuals look cool. I think the battle sequences could be really cool. Apparently, the Sakura gun is supposed to be like the biggest battle ever seen on TV. So hopefully, if nothing else, that would be entertaining, I would imagine. But
Hopefully, as long as it somewhat makes sense.
yeah. But we'll see. I guess
Yeah.
that'll be something that may or may not be on my watch list. I don't know. I still haven't decided.
I'll probably watch it and just get irritated, and Amanda will tell me, stop watching that. You're just getting pissed.
Exactly. Yeah. Ariel will be like, "Why are you watching this if you don't like it?" It's because it's a travesty. You can't look away.
Yeah. Well, Sam, this has been fun. I appreciate it. Thanks for finding time. And this episode of the Battle of Five Armies and the implications and everything. Like, that was your idea, and I helping put together the document. It was a lot of fun to dive into it. So thank you for that awesome idea. It's a really creative one.
Well, thanks, man. I didn't do as much work as I was planning to on the doc. You put in a lot of the backstory and stuff, and I appreciate you putting in the work for it. It was a lot of fun. I did enjoy, like, it's fun getting to talk with all the other people on X and Twitter, Feanor, Middle Earth Mixer, Daniel. I listened to a little bit of the most recent one, hearing him again. That was fun. And Peachy Pie or whatever, like, she was a Tolkien scholar.
Oh yeah.
But it is really fun, like, just getting like to dive into something together and really flesh out something like this was a blast. So thank you, brother.
Yeah, of course. I mean, just the fact that we started doing this, like, it's always been us at the core. So being able to go back to our roots in any way is nice. And it's always good to just spend time with you and kick back for a little bit and talk about something we're both interested in.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, we are going to wrap things up and call for aid. So we're going to break into the halls of Mediceld and shout, "Gondor calls for aid. Will you, Rohan, answer?" So if you enjoyed the podcast, please light a beacon of your own with sharing this with fellow friends and fans. Like, subscribe, leave a review. Please leave a review. We haven't had a review on Apple Podcasts for over a year now. So please let us know. I know people are listening, so let us know. If it's terrible, let us know. If it's great, let us know. If you're indifferent, 3 stars, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. But yeah, if you want to, like, share a letter like Andrew did, or your Tolkien story, you can email that. We'll read it on the podcast here. You can email to weckpodcast@gmail.com, or you can DM Seth on X or on any of our Instagram or social media handles. We're very excited for an upcoming fan radio drama called Concerning Hobbits, the Red Book of Westmarch. So if you haven't heard about that yet, it's going to be epic. We're really, really excited for that coming up. But we thank you for stepping out on the road with us and enjoying some well-earned comforts. But until next time, we will be a Jew, a very fond farewell.